Hey, 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 welcome to Reclaim Today. I am your rather lonely host here, Tim Owens, co-founder of Reclaim Hosting. So today I was kind of thinking, what are we going to do for an episode? And I thought, what would be really cool is actually take questions from people. And I thought of this very last minute. So I don't know that I'll have any questions. I may not. I may not have anybody watching me today or live, but if you do, throw in some questions there in the chat, right off to your right on YouTube, if I recall the user interface, unless they've changed it at some point. So you can do it in the chat. You could do it on Twitter, of course, Reclaim Hosting as the Twitter account, or you can even call in. I don't know if you caught that. If you're one of our Twitter followers, you would have, but I've even figured out how you can call in. It's a phone number, and it is 781-448-4461, pin number 78429. And you will never remember that, I'm sure. But check our Twitter account. I tweeted this out about a few minutes ago. If you want to call in, we can take calls at certain points as well, and I'll jump in and talk to folks there. But you can also just, be totally shy and put them in the chat there, tweet them out to us, whatever you want to do. I am hanging out in a super secret location. This is Reclaim Video. A lot of people weren't sure that it was real, but it is totally real and it's alive. And I'm checking out videos here. Grab my favorite here, which is Return to Oz. I actually blogged about this about a month or two ago. This is a scary movie. It was, for some reason, a movie that I love to watch as a kid. And I don't know why, because it's horrifying. I mean, the movie starts out with them basically doing shock therapy on Dorothy because she can't sleep at night because she has all these dreams of this fantasy world called Oz. And Oniam and her uncle decide that they need to do shock therapy on her and take her in to do that. So, I mean, that starts the movie, and it just gets even weirder from there. Very cool video to check out in the space here. Only available at Reclaim Video, 2320 Plank Road, Fredericksburg, Virginia. So, but I figured this would be a nice backdrop to today's call, which the real point of this is to answer your questions. We don't get a lot of opportunities to interface directly with our customers. Obviously, we do plenty of support tickets day to day, no doubt about that. But sometimes maybe you have questions that don't necessarily, fit the mold of a support ticket, or maybe you're just curious about something, or maybe you've been meaning to put in a support ticket, but you feel like that's a little bit too formal. You don't want to waste our time, and I appreciate that. I really do. But this could be the opportunity for you to be like, Tim, WTF, what's going on with this specific thing? And I'd be happy to answer it. I've got a little laundry list of things that I could talk about here, and I'm happy to do that as well. And I probably will jump into some of that here in a little bit, just common things that we run into, stuff that might be of interest. And we'll throw in the show notes documentation that we've written about stuff like this and various things that we run into as we get into it. But I would love to make this a little bit more interactive. If you actually got questions, throw them in the chat there, or tweet them out to us, and maybe my colleague Lauren that's in the chat will actually tell me what they're saying on Twitter, so I don't have to keep looking down at my screen. That's a little hint there. But let's make it a little bit interactive. I'm going to go ahead and jump into one specific scenario of something that I ran into really recently with someone, and it's a curious setting in WordPress that I don't even understand why it exists. I frankly don't. You can actually, in WordPress, change your URL, which sounds really cool. Like, hey, you bought timowens.com, but suddenly you decide, I'm getting married and I'm actually going to take my wife's name, so I'm going to be timsmith.com. So you go into your WordPress site, and in the settings, it says timowens.com is your URL, and you're like, no, I want to change it. And I go ahead and change it to timsmith.com, and your entire site breaks. WordPress does not have any sort of domain registration option built into the software. You can't just change a URL like that. You actually go buy the domain first, and then you've got to tell your hosting company about the domain. You've got to add it into Cpanel. You've got to do various things. So that's a really tricky thing, because WordPress has a setting saying, do you want to change the URL of your site? And then basically you're guaranteeing that it's going to break the site. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So I'm in my Cpanel. Let me switch over here to my screen so you can see this. Give me 2 seconds to switch this. Oh, where do you change the screen options here? Screen share. Yeah, let's just do the whole screen for now. That'll make it easiest. Yeah, so this is my Cpanel account. I actually, if you don't know much about me, I actually enjoy homebrewing, craft beer. And so I decided to create a WordPress blog specifically to that. And I'll use this as an example. So shout out to this if you're interested in that. brew.timowens.io is where I talk about the beers that I've brewed. I've only done 3 so far. Some of them suck, but it is what it is. But I'm going to log in here so we can go into the WordPress dashboard, which you're certainly familiar with, I'm sure. And we'll go down to settings, which is a natural location, you would think, because you're changing a setting in WordPress. And you see this WordPress address, the site address. Again, why are there 2? Who knows? Who cares? But you see that and you go, I don't know that brew.timowens is right. Or maybe like I actually, this was started on a subdomain and maybe you decide, well, I actually want to run this from a new domain that I'm going to call like brewyboy.com. I think that could be cool. And maybe since it's here twice, I'll add it in twice there. So brewyboy.com is going to be my new website. And this makes sense, right? You go down here, you hit save changes, and check out what happens. The site is completely broken at this point. I don't even know what that URL is up there. brewyboy.com doesn't resolve anything. If I try to load it on the web, it doesn't work. And now if I try to go to brew.timowens.io, my original website, it's broken even on the front end. I can't get to the dashboard anymore, so I can't change the setting back. And on top of that, if I go to the home page, like all of my style sheets are gone. There's no style to it at all, no images, no fonts, no nothing. It just has this really awful look to it. So this is usually at the point where somebody puts in a support ticket to us, which totally makes sense because, it's not your fault that WordPress created this setting that essentially guarantees you'll break your website. But how do you fix this? This is something we run into often. And the way to fix this easily is to go into Cpanel. And what you want to do, you're going to have to actually edit the database. Cpanel has a tool called phpMyAdmin. And I'm moving a little fast there. If I search phpMyAdmin, I find that. But even if I didn't search, if I went down to the databases section, you would see it right there, phpMyAdmin. And when you open that up, is phpMyAdmin not working? Let me refresh my page just to make sure. Oh, sad. I can't get in there to change my database. Well, that's a struggle. Let me go in a different way. Normally, phpMyAdmin will log you in automatically. In this case, that does not appear to be happening. So we're doing this live and on the fly. Since I am Uber administrator, I'm just going to get into phpMyAdmin for every website on here. And then I'll drill down to just my databases. So this is what you would see if you logged in to phpMyAdmin. And you can see I have a lot of databases. I play around with software. What can I say? Hopefully yours will probably just say something like towens_WP1, something like that. You'll see down here, I've got quite a few WP installs here. Who knows which one is which? And that's a good question. How would you find it out? If I go back to Installatron, I can actually find out what the database on this is. If I go to this brewlog one and I click this wrench icon here, it's going to give me a little bit more information. And specifically under the Files and Tables tab, tables are your database tables. It gives me the name of the database user, that thing, and that database name is what I care about. So WP8 is the WordPress database I'm looking for. So I'm going to switch back here, and I'm going to go into it. So these are all of the tables in there. And if you go into WP_options, there is one of those 2 URLs. Those 2 URLs just map directly to database tables in the system. So here is where I need to change those back. brew.timowens.io, and you can basically just double click on any database table and it opens up a little editor. If you wanted to change your blog name, you could do it in there. I don't recommend this, but it's possible, especially if you can't get into your website to make changes. So I changed the site URL there. The other one is called the home URL, and that's on page 2. So if I scroll down, I'm going to hit that arrow to go to page 2, and there it is, home. So again, I don't really understand why there's 2 settings for the same thing, but I changed 2, so I got to change 2 back. So those are set now. So hopefully, if I go to my website and I clear my cache by no. Did I really break my website? I've completely screwed up my website. This is sad. I chose a very hard one, apparently, to make the first test here. Well, this is what happens when you do it live and on the fly, folks. You get system administrators like me who don't actually use WordPress too often, but I do. But this isn't working, and I'm not sure why. So I'll come back to that in a little bit because I'm determined by the end of this podcast, I'm going to figure it out. But do I have any questions from the audience? That's what I really care about, is questions from you all. And go ask them questions. I see a lot of people talking about it, but nobody asking any questions. So I'll go right into another support scenario. And because I'm such an awesome multitasker, I'm going to think about how I would fix that WordPress problem and come back to it. So like I said, I'm determined to fix that. That's normally how you would do it. You just change those two tables in the database to fix the problem in there. So the database is fixed, it's still not working. Who knows why? Let's talk about some other stuff, and let's jump away from support for a second. Let's talk about a little bit something easier. Omeka S is a great example. Lauren was just talking to me about this a little bit earlier, and some people aren't quite sure now what version of Omeka they should be installing. So there's Omeka Classic, which is what a lot of people have been using over the past couple of years, and they added Classic onto the end of the name because now you've got Omeka S. And what is Omeka S? If you go to the omeka.org website, and I'll switch over here so you can see, you can very clearly see that they've got two different versions of software. And they do a nice job here of talking about why you might want to use each one. So you've got the original Classic one, which is mostly for individual projects. And then you've got Omeka S, more for institutions. So if you're familiar about WordPress multi-site, which is a way to run a single install of WordPress, but have multiple blogs within it, Omeka S is very similar to that. It's a multi-site instance of Omeka. You can have multiple repositories that can all share different metadata and items and things like that. So it's a way to manage on a deeper level. And also, Omeka S has a whole lot of newer code in it. It was completely built from the ground up. It feels a lot more modern. So I've seen some people who are sort of defaulting to going to Omeka S just because it feels more modern. There's a lot of similarities to Omeka Classic, but in terms of the interface, it's a lot nicer to use. Now, the downside is if you're just doing a single repository, which a lot of people are, Omeka S is not the right tool for you, at least not right now. It might be in the future, but right now, Omeka S is really built with an infrastructure to allow you to create multiple repositories, and it's really meant for libraries, for institutions and things like that. If you're just trying to do a single exhibit, Omeka Classic is really created more for building out an actual website, for having a front end, using simple pages to create different pages and stuff. You get that nice clean URL at the beginning of the website instead of having to drill down to the actual exhibit or repository that you created within Omeka S. So I would still recommend Omeka Classic if you're just creating a single purpose website using Omeka. If you're thinking about it more like, you may have more than one repository of items, and you may, if you're a library, if you're an organization, Omeka S could be a nice way to consolidate all that into a single platform as opposed to having to install multiple copies of Omeka every single time. So that's the difference between the two. But lucky for you, Reclaim Hosting has installers for both of them. We released our Omeka S installer this year. I believe it was back in February, April, somewhere around that time frame. It's been so long at this point and we've done so much, but yeah, we've got installers for Omeka S and Omeka Classic. So we make it dead simple for you right from within Installatron to do that. So, but that's a little bit about the differences between the two. Let's see what else I got going on. This is live and on the fly, and one would wonder at this point if I could fix my own website, but it's unclear to me. Who knows if I can ever get that back in? It might be gone for good. That might be it. I might just have to give up with it. One interesting thing to note here and I can't really explain this, is that I can get back into the dashboard. So here's an interesting thing. So I can get into the dashboard of my website, which means my site is working, but the homepage is still showing something else. So my immediate thing to think about is, are there any plugins or themes conflicting in here? And if I look down in here, I don't have a whole lot of plugins turned on, I don't think, but my memory's not that great. And if I go in here, I'll look around and check this out. Out of those minimal list of plugins, one of them is a caching plugin, WP Super Cache. And this is something that I turned on. So caching is probably the most common thing that we ask people to try and clear in order to see if a website is working or not. We get a lot of tickets coming in that say things like, I installed WordPress, but when I go to my site, I still see that, videotape, or, I renewed my domain, but it's still showing that it's offline. So caching comes into play in the browser, comes into play in the laptop. It comes into play in your internet service provider. Like every step of the way, there's caching involved, which is awesome because it makes things load really fast. It sucks when you're making changes. And in this case, I was changing URLs around. And what happened is when I loaded that site and it didn't have any CSS, WP Super Cache was like, awesome, this site loads really quickly. I'm going to save it. And it did. So all I need to do is clear my cache. I could do that in one of two ways. One is that WP Super Cache, this particular plugin, let me switch over to this and I'll show you, actually has a setting to turn it on or off, and you can delete the cache in here. So I could delete the cache within here. The other thing that I could do, and if this would be more hardcore, if I just really needed this to get online, is I could deactivate the plugin as a whole. Just take that out. And that's a great way to troubleshoot things. I was able to get back into the dashboard, and now I want to see if my site's back up and running. And if I look really cool here, look at that. My site is back up and it's working. And so I kind of talked myself through this, but this is the same method that I go through to figure out, what's working and what's not. You've just got to kind of dig through things. If the homepage doesn't work, then see if you can log into the dashboard. If the dashboard doesn't work, go into the database. If the database isn't working right, another thing that I could have done is to actually turn off specific plugins and edit things directly in the file system, which is another option. If you need to disable a plugin in WordPress, go into the file manager and just rename the plugins folder, the entire folder, or this particular plugin that you're trying to disable. If you rename the entire folder, every single plugin gets turned off automatically. If you go within there and you rename a specific plugins folder, that plugin gets turned off. So it's a great way to try and figure out, is this a plugin issue? Is my theme broken? What's going on? And work directly in the file system. So yeah, so that's changing your URL. That's Omeka. But what do you got for me? I really need questions from the audience here to make this interesting at all. So, if you've got some, throw them in the chat there. I see Dan Vokes is here. How's it going? All Hallows Reed's site would not survive each October without it. Yeah, so Dan's a big fan of WP Super Cache. I am as well. And let's talk a little bit more about caching, because I kind of briefly said, it makes your site fast. And that's actually another support question we get a lot, is my site's running slow. And there's so many factors in that. Obviously, it's our job at Reclaim Hosting to make sure that the server is running well. But that's not enough. Now, every website is different. And somebody who creates a very basic Hello World blog site, it's probably going to run very fast right out of the box. But you inevitably start adding images and text and doing some fancy things with it. And you get bored with the theme and you add a new theme in there. And then you throw 3 or 4 different plugins in. And suddenly things start to crawl. Things slow down a bit. And so you're trying to figure out what's causing that. So you can, of course, troubleshoot and disable certain plugins. Not every theme is made the same. Some themes are really smart about the way they load things to make things go really fast. And others are They're just not. So I always say play around with some of that stuff. But the best start that you can do is to put a caching plugin in for WordPress. So especially if you're running WordPress. Other applications like Drupal have some caching built in. Omeka doesn't have anything by default, but look for what's available for your software. Specifically for WordPress, I like WP Super Cache. There's a couple others out there that are very popular as well, but it's a great one, and that essentially will take the popular pages of your website and it's turning them into HTML in the background. HTML, of course, is a coding language to build out websites, and WordPress, meanwhile, is a PHP application. The difference being that a PHP application is dynamically pulling things from the database. So it's grabbing things on the fly to render a website, which is cool in that it's dynamic. It's not cool in that it takes longer. HTML, it's really, really fast to load. And so WP Super Cache does all the rendering in the background and then turns it into HTML files so that your site loads really super fast. And you can even do some tricks in there like preloading your cache, where it will go through every page of your website and render it exactly as it should, and then turn all those into HTML files. And then you can tell it, hey, do that every 3 hours or every day. Maybe I don't update too often. You can just do it once a day. And it'll keep all of those HTML files, and you've essentially got a static version of your site without doing a whole lot. And then if you need to go in and change things, you just purge your cache and you're good to go. So I think it's a great trick. It's a great way to figure out, how you might speed up a site beyond just like, oh, I got to disable my theme. I've got to change out the plugins. Start by implementing some caching and just see if that helps. It's not always going to fix every problem. But it can definitely make a huge difference for a lot of sites. So that's a good way to speed things up. What other questions might people have? Nobody's called me in. Nobody's notified me on Twitter of anything. So it's a little lonely up in here. I'm not going to hold it against you all, but we do want to kind of make this a regular thing. And to be fair, I came up with this idea about 2 hours ago. So I won't hold it against you if you're not even watching. If you catch this after the fact and you just wish I would shut up, unlike and unsubscribe for less, I guess would be the term there. I don't know. But if you do have other questions, I'm happy to take them. Meanwhile, let's talk about some other stuff. I'll jump in to my cPanel again to get an idea of various things that people run into problems with. One of them might be disk space. So, we've gotten some tickets recently where people are like, damn it, like I had 10 gigs of disk space and it's all gone already. I don't know what's going on. I don't use a whole lot. And sometimes if you're using a lot of images or movies, that might be the case. But we've ran into situations where it's not that. And the last thing we want to do is have you buy more space for something really silly, like a log file that's filling up your entire account or something like that. But how do you know where to look, especially if you've got a lot of stuff in your account? You might feel like, well, I'll start by, I'll delete all my emails. Well, email is just text. It doesn't take up a whole lot of space unless there's attachments. And you might be deleting things and they're going into a trash can and then thinking you're making progress and you're really not. So let's take a look at some ways that you can really drill down and narrow down to what exactly is going on. And there's two ways that we can do this. And I like this because it'll also cover a little bit more of an advanced technique using SSH to log in with Terminal. So there's two ways to do this. One is that cPanel has a disk utility. So there's two ways to get into it. Either I can click on disk usage over here in the statistics area, and that'll take me to it. Or under the files area of cPanel, you'll find disk usage. And if we go in there, it creates what I'll say somewhat helpful graph of where your disk space is being used. And I say somewhat helpful because this only looks at folders at the top level of your account. So, luckily my subdomain is here, brew.timowens, dev.timowens, I've cleaned out some stuff and I can see, a graph. It tells me how much is in each folder, and that's useful. But a lot of times what we see are this thing, like files in hidden subdirectories, or what is often the case is that if people have a lot of stuff in the public_HTML folder, which is the main folder for your website, you can't drill down into that. If you click on it, it actually opens up the file manager to look at those files. That's not really useful to me. I really needed to know more about, like, what, in that folder is running into issues. Now, what a lot of people don't know about this is if you scroll down a little bit more, this allows you to expand each folder to show you the space being used by each one, and it's showing me hidden folders as well. So check this out. If we go in here, and let's say, going back to my example, public_HTML, it's using 390 megabytes, but I can hit this arrow, and now those numbers beside each folder in here will break it down for me. So I know that my largest one is timowens.io, followed by Reader, which is Tiny RSS, an application that I love for reading RSS feeds. So I can really get a better idea. And maybe even down within this one website in timowens.io, I could say, well, what's taking up all the space in there? Well, it looks like I actually created a subfolder installation for a new application called OJS, Open Journal Systems, that I'm looking at creating an installer for. It's not a new app in general, but it's one that we're looking at creating an installer for. And so I created timowens.io/OJS, and that's taking up 116 megabytes. Maybe I don't need that anymore. Maybe I just delete that app and save some space. But I never would have known that looking at this, because all I get is public_HTML is taking up 390 megabytes, and it would have been, total needle in a haystack to figure out what was going on there. So that's one way to drill down and actually figure out what's going on with disk space in your account. The other way that you can do this is with a server-side application called NCDU. NCDU is a utility that's on the server, and it runs by command line, which I know I just lost about 90% of the people that are watching this here. You don't log in by terminal or command line and have to do that kind of stuff. And I totally understand. I'm all for digging through graphical user interfaces, and just, having pictures and things to plug things around. We're all about making things easy. But occasionally you find utilities that are pretty nice that can be run through the command line. So I'm going to walk you through this. And this is actually cool because it can showcase for you a new feature of Cpanel. And Dan says he's one of the 10%. I like it. I like it. So, but check this out. So first, Cpanel has a new feature called Terminal. I'm going to scroll down here under the advanced section because you're advanced users at this point. And if I open up Terminal, I understand. I want to proceed. I am logged into my account now with shell scripting, so I can actually run scripts. I can run utilities on the server, and I don't have to necessarily know how to use SSH keys, how to log into the server and do things like that. So this is really awesome because this is the first hurdle for somebody who's wanting to dive into the secure shell environment. They're wanting to do some stuff by command line, or they're following a set of instructions and it's just not working. And so this is built right in here. And so let me show you how NCDU works. It's really hard. You type NCDU, 4 letters, and hit enter. And what comes back here is a reverse ordered list of the folders taking up the amount of space in your computer. I'm going to scroll down so you get the full list here. So I immediately know that my Installatron backup folder is taking up the most space, followed by a hidden folder called npm, which is related to Node.js and some other things. I've got a subdomains folder, and I can just move up and down with the arrow keys here, and I can hit enter, and it goes down in there. And it's super fast too. So taking that example before, looking at the public_HTML folder, 390 megabytes. If I hit enter, I can go down in here, timowens.io. There's my OJS folder. So it's really super quick. And I can scroll back up to the top to get back to the top level folder. So to go back there, if I went to public_HTML, these 2 dots up here take me back up to the top. Let's say, for example, that OJS install, I wanted to delete it. So I went down in here and I see this OJS install. If you hit the D key, it will say, are you sure that you want to delete it? And you can say yes. And now it's gone. And now I've saved that space on my computer. Could do the same thing, or on the server rather, with this zip file in here. You can go back up here. You can really clean out an account as well as, and it will update in real time with the stuff on the top always being the largest files and folders in your account. So NCDU is an awesome option for figuring out disk space on there. Similarly, I mentioned, this is a terminal built into Cpanel, but if you're comfortable with it, you could also open up a command line like this and actually log into your account. So normally this would take the form of SSH space your Cpanel username, TONs, at the server name. So I can do joydiv.reclaimhosting.com here, or what's more popular is I can actually type in my domain name, timowens.io. Now, normally yours will prompt you for a password, which is the email that you got. But in this case, I have an SSH key set up. And I have a video that I'll put in the show notes about how to use SSH keys. It just saves me a little bit of time. It logs me in automatically. But this is the same terminal. I could do the same NCDU. Oh, Lord. I don't know why it doesn't want to let me do NCDU on this account. I'll have to figure that out. But you can run a variety of commands in here. You can list it. You can go into certain folders if you're comfortable with this stuff. But it's really cool because Cpanel can actually show you that stuff directly in the terminal within that area now. So I really enjoy that. And that's a way to really drill down into the disk usage. It's one of many features that you'll find that once you start digging into terminal and drinking more Mountain Dew and getting your sysadmin on, you'll realize like this isn't just for basement neckbeards. This is good stuff. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the terminal. That's what I want to say. So we're coming up on 30 minutes. I don't think I have any questions, but I'll check one last time just to see. No questions in here. No questions in the chat that I can see. So I'm going to wrap things up for this time. But I think we're probably going to try to do this every Thursday, maybe, depending. I'll be a lot better about tweeting it out, maybe even blogging about it in advance so people ask more questions, come in here. I'd really love for this to be a space for you if you don't feel it's necessary to submit a support ticket or something, but you've got an idea, you've got something that you want to bounce off me, even if it was something along the lines of like, hey, I've got this class running in the fall, and I don't know if there's a particular application that would do this or a way that we could set up WordPress to do something like that, that kind of consulting stuff. This is free consultant. This is just me standing here. It's a chance for you to ask us what's going on, what our thoughts are on certain things, and we're all about it. So that's all I've got for today. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for bearing with me. Thanks for troubleshooting with me, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.